Hello and welcome to Newsworthy Stories with Jacqueline Jimenez. When I was first asked to interview Dr. William Pickard, I was just learning about his millionaire moves. And then he began to speak.
Author and business magnate Dr. William Pickard taking his millionaire moves to the iCombo World Network. Conversations of collaboration were brewing as members and guests came together to build relationships and share a meal. The organization serving over 13,000 professionals around the world at every level, including this millionaire.
If you don't network, you might not work. It's all about relationships. It's all about people we know. It's all about people that know us. And that's why these kinds of gatherings are so important. And when I met Hutch, I've seen these kinds of gatherings before in my life. They're all over Detroit, Atlanta, Chicago. But I never had met someone who had the passion that he brought with him. Relationships are critical.
Bill is an everyday guy, okay? Community college graduate. Somebody grew up in a small town, went through becoming a social worker, and now runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation. So there was nothing about his background early on that suggested that he would be walking with kings and queens and heads of state and so on and so forth. But he does. And not only walking with them, they come to him, looking to him for support, looking to him for advice. And so the humility, the compassion, and the passion he has for helping others, the example that he is in terms of how he carries himself, for me, that's a great model to follow and emulate.
Dr. William Pickard may be ordinary, but his resume is not. Known as Bill Pickard to most, he started out as a social worker before becoming one of the first Black-owned owners of a McDonald's franchise. He announced the release of his new book, Surviving the Shift, 7 Proven Millionaire Moves for Embracing Change and Building Wealth, then talked about how he stumbled into business.
Well, stumble means that there are a lot of black men and women in the city of Cleveland, Ohio, in 1967-68, who were fighting to get McDonald's to finally admit black owners. And even though I wasn't in Cleveland, I was in Columbus, Ohio, and I was working at McDonald's, working on my PhD, and this is what God does. One of the executives of McDonald's came to the restaurant. He said, "You from Detroit?" I said, "Yes, sir." He's a muckety muck. He says, we're going to open some McDonald's in Detroit for black people, for black people. So I give him 3 names, Dennis Archer, Doug Smith, and Bill Pickard. All my fraternity brothers, all the guys I went to school with. And Dennis was in law school, Doug was getting an MBA, and I was looking for a way to make some money. And so that's what happened, and that's what God does, and I'm still benefiting from that tremendous introduction of stumbling. I'm a profound believer in exposure, profound believer in vision, because even the Bible says, without vision, the people will perish. And so God has given me the gift, I think, and I believe, to see things that other people don't see. When Jay-Z was 18 years of age, he lived in New York in something called the Marcy Projects. And the story goes, this young man, and those of us who grew up in the projects, we know that the projects have these little small windows. Jay-Z was 18 years of age. And the story goes that he went to these little windows and he wrote the following lyric for one of his raps. Your vision must be greater than the window you're looking through. So they got some big windows here. But let me tell you right now, my vision now is greater than all these windows. And I imagine Jay-Z's vision as a billionaire is greater than all these ones. You heard them introduce me as a co-managing partner of the MGM Casino in Detroit. Now the casino in this case is not somebody's basement. This is a real building, and MGM is a real publicly traded company. So how does a Bill Pickard become co-managing partner of the MGM Casino in Detroit, Michigan? My roommate in college, we were 19, 20 years old. I was a social work major. He was a special ed major. 30 years later, he's a lawyer and the mayor of the city of Detroit, and I is a social worker in Detroit with 1/3 of one McDonald's. And MGM says, Mr. Mayor, can you give us the name of a business partner in Detroit that might be able to work with us? He said, sure. My college roommate, Bill Pickard. That's how I became the co-managing partner of the MGM Casino. It's relationships. If I want to talk to somebody, I'm going to call Hutch. I'm going to call Hutch. Because once you know your mission, then you put together your coalition. Come on now, talk to me. Wake up, wake up. But relationships are critical. Jay Reynolds, I can always know I can call Jay Reynolds. Horace, my God, everybody knows that wonderful family. But it's all about relationships.
Bill Pickard. I actually met Mr. Pickard, or Dr. Pickard, at an Akaba event that I actually was sponsoring with Hutch. Mr. Pickard walked up to me and said, hey, look, son, what are you doing with your life? What are you doing with your life? Where are you headed? And I thought that was a strange question, but it was coming from a millionaire, right? A gazillionaire. So that was enough for me to say, well, I got this going, I got this going, I got to get this going. He said, I'll tell you what you do. What are you doing tomorrow night? I said, probably nothing, Mr. Pickard. He said, well, I'll tell you what I want you to do. I want you to meet me for dinner. And that's where it started. I met Mr. Pickard for dinner and we had a conversation. He asked me again, where are you headed? What are you doing? I understand what you do for a business, but where are you really headed? And I really couldn't answer him. I felt like I babbled and I did not give him an answer that I felt good about. Mr. Pickard and I sat down and had dinner again. I had a full-fledged plan of not only running my business, which is 20 years old, I might add, 20-year-old multi-million-dollar business, but I didn't know where I wanted to be and what kind of legacy I wanted to leave. And as a result of that conversation, I began to have those conversations with myself and map out a plan to say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is who I really want to be when I grow up. And it was a pivotal moment for me. It changed the trajectory of me, my life. It changed the trajectory of my business. And I will always be grateful for the fact that that man took the time out to talk to me.
Finally, as I close up, is faith. Now, I can't tell you if you're a Baptist, a Buddha, a Muslim, or Seventh-day Adventist. I don't really care. But I do know this. There's something in the universe that's greater than any man or woman. And I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt that all of the blessings that I have received did not come because I look like Denzel Washington with a lot of money. I know that. There's something in the universe that helps me and order my steps every day of my life. And I beg you, as I sit down, to just do your best, and God will do the rest. Give it a hand.
And joining me now to talk about his new book is the Dr. William Pickard, known as Bill Pickard. So glad to have you.
Glad to be here.
Wearing your A5A shirt representing.
Changed my life.
Tell me, so you're now on tour with your new book, Surviving the Shift, Millionaire Moves, 7 proven, ways to for through entrepreneurship. Tell me, what are you doing now?
Well, we're hitting about 20, 30 schools, trying to get them in before May, Mother's Day. We're doing a couple of commencements. We're doing a commencement at University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff, and we're doing the commencement at Fort Valley State University in Georgia. So we have hit about 18 schools so far this year. My audience is primarily college students, but I tell everyone this book is for anyone from 1 to 100 because the nuggets in here are life changing and life informative. And anyone, regardless of their chronological age or emotional age, can gain something from this book.
Why did you write it?
Well, I had been teaching entrepreneurship for years at the University of Michigan, and I took a break and I went to a black college. I had never attended a black college, and I went down to Alabama State, and I taught there for $1 a year for 2 years. And that's when I began to see the possibilities of how this book could alter perspectives on career, business opportunities, and business development. And so I took a third year and wrote the book. But it was a life changing experience for me because things that I had grown up around, things that I had just grasped by osmosis, I found that many, many students, many, many people had never had these experiences. And so I was able to translate my experiences into what I hope and pray is a practical, informative guide of how to acquire wealth in America.
And this book is coming off another book, right? So, this is like an expansion or an extension of the original Millionaire Moves. I
Yes,
think
ma'am.
you have the book, you said.
Yeah, I do. I keep it with me all the time. And what we accomplished in the second book was how do you survive when you have all these things, when you know the 7 principles, when you live them every day, but what do you do when everything goes wrong? Whether it's a pandemic or whether it's a crazy bank or whether it's a manufacturing problem, what do you do? How do you survive this earthquake that you find yourself in? And there are some logical things that you do to survive these situations because there are very few businesses that go from $0 to $1 million or to $1 billion that doesn't have challenges. And you have to survive those challenges, not every day, hopefully, but whenever they occur.
What do you want people to take from this book or either one of the books that you put out? Because, you know, as I said in the intro, it wasn't until you started speaking that, I was like, what? Who am I dealing with here? It was one story after the other, but it was the way you put it together that it made you could hear the gasping in the room, of people as you begin to share these different stories. What do you want people to understand about what you've shared?
Well, there are two takeaways for me that are very, very important. The first one is if Bill Pickard, a poor boy from LaGrange, Georgia, and Flint, Michigan, who went to school to be a social worker, if Bill Pickard can create massive wealth in America, anyone can. And I believe these two books will help propel you to that goal smoother and faster. And it is not rocket science, it is not magic, it is hard work, it is day in and day out, but it's doable. It's achievable. And I believe most people can do this without any great genius in their soul. But you must have stick to itness and you must put the work in. And I believe relationships are critical to that process. Relationships.
Now we talked a lot about, your start with, through McDonald's, but you also what are the other businesses that you're in now or that grew out of those relationships?
I went from McDonald's to automotive supply for Ford, GM, Chrysler, and Mercedes. And I went from that to being a major part of a Detroit MGM casino in Detroit, Michigan. And from that, we went into newspapers, and I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to save SAVE 7 historic black newspapers, including the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, and the Atlanta Daily World. Those papers are over 100 years old, and we've been able to make those papers relevant today, not so much in printing the paper, but the digital platforms that we have created have been very impressive.
I forget about the newspapers, when we first met. And I was saying to myself as you're saying that, I'm like, oh, wait, we need to talk. I've got some stories for you. Because I definitely, with Newsworthy Stories, one of the things that we're doing, one of the things that I do specifically is I'm looking for difference makers. And you are clearly, a difference maker on so many levels. But in business, often we can't tell those stories in news because to news sometimes it sounds like a commercial. But there's so many stories in businesses and nonprofits that, I find that some of the things that you were sharing, you know, are pivotal. I really want people to understand that, this was just the icing of the cake, what I was able to share. There were so many stories. That I couldn't share, like the one about Ford and, the tire story. And you're welcome to share that one because I couldn't share that one in the story, but I really liked it. And just that I did share about your stumbling, your the art of stumbling, which I find, you were not necessarily an expert in any of these fields, but you knew how to be an expert. I don't even know how to
Well,
explain that.
I use a quote all the time. Once you determine your mission, then you put together your coalition. If you're going to develop hotels in Miami, Florida, there are certain things and people you must include. If you're going to do manufacturing of the new electric cars in Tennessee, there are some people and things that you must do. So once you have your mission, then you put together your coalition. Simple.
Which makes perfect sense, right? I you did share that one that night. So, I do one obviously I would, tell people get both books. Millionaire Moves and Surviving the Shift, 7 Proven Millionaire Moves for embracing, change and building wealth. I mean, these are things that if you're in business or even just in life, you're
In
going to want to
life.
build, right? Because it's not just business, it's really life. That we're building every day, whether it's family, whether it's, ministries, it doesn't matter. You're still building and you're trying to succeed in these particular ways. Um, One of the ways the ways to get your book is, of course, Amazon, but you go to millionairemoves.com and you're going to find a wealth of information about, Bill Pickard and the impact that he's made and the companies he's connected with.
Well, I've been very blessed, and my community has supported me tremendously. The larger business community was very welcoming when I came along, and this new thing called entrepreneurship. Now, you must remember, we have a vivid history of Black people being in business in this country and, of course, in Africa. We did not come here simply as laborers. We were merchants. We were the merchant class. We were the skilled tradesmen. We built those beautiful mansions in the South. We built the flagler highways. We did those things, and we have the men and women that we can amplify and glorify by name as to some of the things that they accomplished in Florida or Michigan or California. It is a very rich history, and I don't have time to bore you with it, but I must tell you this one story. I was born in LaGrange, Georgia, at 213 King Street. And years later, when I'm about 20 some years of age, I'm reading on the history of a Black businessman man named Horace E. King. He was a slave born in South Carolina. He earned his freedom when he was about 46 years of age in Alabama. They set him free. He became one of the most successful bridge builders and one of the
Mm.
most successful business people in Georgia and Alabama and South Carolina. This Black man in 1872 built a community in LaGrange, Georgia for Negroes and named it King Street, and that is where I was born.
Mm.
So I know God has put in my DNA all those things that Horace L. King represented, and all the things that my mom and dad and all the folk around me represented. And I'm on a mission. I have to do this. I must spread this gospel because we must understand we need people in all facets of American life, business people, tycoons, oil, banks, and what have you. But a few of us must take up the galleon and develop businesses in our community and hire people that look like us and create mega business so that we can hire people in our community as well as other newcomers to America. We must do that, and we must start yesterday.
And you brought up just a great point, and that is at this event, you were speaking at an ICABA World Network event, which I know you're an ICABA World Network member as well. But Jerome Hutchinson Jr., who is the founder, he was adamant. He said, "You must interview William Pickard." And I was like, he's like, normally when I'm covering those events, I cover his events often. And usually, I do more about the event. And he was like, "No, I want you to focus on William Pickard because it is, with he has over 13,000, professionals in this
Mhm.
ICABA World Network group. I don't know what you call it, networking
Yeah.
group.
Mhm.
And, the whole point is building relationships, understanding what other people are doing in your community or around the world. And, this is how I met you. And I feel very fortunate, and also, Jay Reynolds, I'm very I enjoyed that. I enjoy every time I go to those events, because I do meet new people, but I see people in industries that do look like me that I didn't even realize they were in, or gosh, I could connect you with this person. I can connect you with that person. And
Yeah.
it's just not something that I grew up with because I'm a military child. I grew up in the military, and we went from base to base to base, and I lived overseas quite a bit. So the Black community was not something that really came to light until I went to college. And I was like, "Oh, I'm Black." And I don't mean it like that, but it was like I went to Florida State University, and I didn't even know Florida A&M University was on the other hill. I had
Oh
no
my
idea
God.
that. Didn't even know it was there. One day I was like, "What's that building over there?" And they were like, "That's FAMU." I was like, "What's that?" No clue. Then,
Duh.
duh, right? But then because Florida A&M had a journalism school
Hmm.
and Florida State
A
didn't,
very good one.
right. And they were Florida students from Florida State were required to take journalism at Florida A&M. So I ended up with both, under my wing. But that's, I had a major in communications and a minor in journalism. But technically, my minor came from Florida A&M University. But at the time, I
Congratulations.
had no idea. And of course, and not of course, but it is also those skills um, which was gave me the ability to get my first job because I could write. If you're going
Congratulations.
into journalism, if you can write, that's what you need to do. Okay, you need
Well,
to
that's
write
a
first.
that's a tremendous story. You should tell that one more often because
I
there is
should.
excellence. There's excellence at Florida State, and there's also excellence at Florida A&M.
Absolutely. But again, people, I think, in general, think that everyone in the Black community knows everyone. And that's a great myth. And we just don't. Um, and I love that Icaba World Network does that. And I get to meet people like you. And so I am very excited about that. So be sure to go and check out William Pickard, whether it is through his book, but my advice would be to book him, have him speak at your event because you cannot keep up with the stories that he has to tell. No book could hold it. It's impossible. And so that would be my recommendation. Bill, thank you so much for joining me today on Newsworthy Stories.
Thank you, and I shall see you soon at another Icaba event.
Sounds good.